afternoon, everyone. And I think it's silent. Who are online? They pick information. Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. I welcome you to this side event, very important one, and it is my honor and privilege to welcome Matthew Vergestrat, the UNDRR Head of Infrastructure and Finance for Resilience Unit. You are welcome. It is important that we have this discussion on disaster reduction because before now, I think there was that feeling. Even some countries still feel that they're immune from the impacts of climate change. And that's why they come up with some policies that people find a bit confusing, even when you are looking at the realities of the time. So it is also important for us to know that you are not entirely safe unless your neighbors and other people are safe. Because one disaster here has the potential to affect the person next door. And it is absolutely important that as nations, we begin to take this seriously by ensuring that we mainstream it into our budget processes. In Parliament sometimes, you will bring up a matter and someone will tell you, no, that does not matter now. No, we are dealing with this situation. Yeah. And then suddenly something impactful happens. Take, for instance, what happened in Borno State in Nigeria. We all were running helter-skelter to find a solution to the massive disasters in the whole of the Northeast region where I serve. And recently, we saw what happened in Spain. And so, if anyone is in doubt about the impact of disaster in our lives, I think that person is making a mistake. So this afternoon is a wonderful opportunity to have you, Mr. Matthew, to use your privileged position to let our people know why this is very important. So I welcome you to guide us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and a pleasure to be with you this afternoon. So as you said, no country is immune to disasters. That's an evidence. And I wanted to use this opportunity today to speak about a little bit how we are looking at how to mobilize more investment in disaster risk reduction, because we have done some studies that are showing that countries are investing about 10 to 25% of what they should be investing in disaster risk reduction. So there is a huge underinvestment in disaster risk reduction, and is actually costing a lot to countries. And so as parliamentarian, you need to be equipped with tools and mechanisms to monitor and play your supervision role in terms of looking at the budget and seeing how much this budget is actually contributing to disaster risk reduction and climate adaptation. So when we talk about disaster risk reduction, is basically, we see that as climate adaptation plus. So it's including climate threat, but also things like earthquake and other that are not linked to climate change. So today, if I may, maybe I can just stand it, give you a bit of an overview of what we have been doing with countries on disaster risk reduction. So we have developed what we call a 5-step approach, where to support countries in this journey, and we are actually doing that in quite a lot of countries as we speak. And the first step is really to understand what are the financial consequences. To really, as you were saying, no countries are immune. So what is the risk that your country is facing? How much money are you expected or likely to lose because of infrastructure damages, of lost of agricultural production, those kind of things? So the first step is that. Then is to see how much you should be investing, how much are you currently investing. So what is the gap between what is the needs for investment and what you are currently doing, and how to track those financial flows. And I think that's what we're going to be focusing on today. And then we have other steps that we're also taking in other countries, where we're looking at how we prioritize investment needs and how we find financing option and solution for those needs, and how we help countries to have some kind of a strategy, financing strategy attached to their, for instance, national adaptation plan or disaster risk reduction strategies. So when you look at the cost of disaster, so if you think that this is the cost of the disaster, you can actually reduce that cost significantly by just investing in prevention, how to avert disaster from happening, by, for instance, enhancing drainage system, or maybe restoring mangrove to prevent coastal erosion. So those are the things that can prevent disaster from happening, and that actually reduce the cost to the country from disaster. Then you have you can reduce the cost when a disaster happens. It does not, or when you have a hurricane or cyclone, it does not need to translate automatically into a disaster. Yeah, things that a country can do to kind of create resilience and mitigate the impact. We talk a lot often about early warning systems, so really making sure that people are aware whenever a disaster is going to strike, so they can take the right measures to take shelter and so on. Similarly, we also are talking about making buildings more resilient to earthquake or other type of disaster. So whenever there is a disaster, the buildings are standing and not collapsing. And then there are things that there's some residual damage that are kind of impossible or not affordable to prevent. So even if you do whatever you can, there are some disasters that will still cause damages to the country. So that's what we are trying to do, is to kind of go from this kind of high level of cost to a much lower one, although not zero, but at least this is what we can avoid through disaster risk reduction action. So if we take the example of there's a country facing $100 of cost of disaster, let's take an example that probably 50% of that cost can be avoided. Then the question is, how much do you need to invest to avoid that cost? What is the ratio, or how much money you need to put on the table to avoid that 50% to happen? And that depends, of course, on the local context and the type of measures that you are doing. But what we are seeing is that actually the cost-benefit ratio of disaster risk reduction measures are really good. We have, and I'm going to show you on the next slide, we look, and that's from the Global Commission on Adaptation, but looking at if you invest $1 on early warning or $1 on infrastructure resilience, what is your benefit going to be? For early warning system, it might be close to 10. For resilient infrastructure, it might be close to 5. For improving agriculture, might be also around 5. So you see, the ratio is quite big. It's more than 1 to 1. It's more than it's the type of investment that you would love to do with your own money. If you had some money and you can have investing $1 and getting $5 in return, that's excellent return. So there is a strong economic case for investing in disaster risk reduction, but it pays off. The problem is that it does some payoff on the long term and not immediately because you might not have a disaster happening immediately the next year. So that's something that sometimes then prevent government or budget to be really allocating sufficient resource to that question. So coming back to my example, if we say you take a ratio of 5 to 1, and they say we want to avoid $50 of disaster, that means you invest $10, you're going to avoid that. So that's maybe something, the range of the needs of your investment. Then the question is actually, how much are you already investing? So maybe a country is already investing out of this 10, maybe they're already investing 5, maybe they're investing 2 or 1. And the problem is that very often we don't know because we're not tracking those financial flows. We, as a government in the national budget, it's not evident how much of the public budget is actually allocated to the disaster risk reduction measure, for instance. And so without knowing that, we don't really know how much more we should be investing. And I think that's what we are trying to kind of solve as an issue by doing what we call budget tagging and tracking of expenditure. And so we're looking, of course, you have different sources of financing flows coming from public, private, international source of financing. Today, we're talking a bit more about the national budget and the role of national budget, but also you need to be able to track, and we're also doing that from the private and international side of things. So what does that mean, doing budget tagging and tracking? I will show you a little bit how the methodology works and what the government can do to get a better understanding of how much the budget is allocated to that. And the idea is that it's not only helping a government to identify maybe some of the gaps, but it's also creating some kind of accountability within the line ministries of government. Because if you say, well, basically disaster risk reduction is a responsibility for all ministries, Ministry of Transport, Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Energy. And if you are not tracking how much those line ministries are investing in risk reduction, you don't have an accountability mechanism. So they can say, well, we're doing our best, maybe it's true, maybe it's not true. But if you can start measuring how much money is actually allocated to that, you can see whether it's a real priority or whether the sufficient amount of money are being put into those priorities. So what we have issued a report called the Resilience Expanding Landscape Report, where we look at the pattern of public spending related to DRR and climate change adaptation. And we have used our methodology, which is the budget tagging and tracking. And I'm going to present to you how does that work. But we did that looking at a data set of 51 African countries, plus some national budget of 3 other countries from other regions. And that's where the numbers I was mentioning at the beginning, the 10 to 25%, that public expenditure only represent 10 to 25%, that's coming from that analysis that you can find it there. This is where some of the figures coming for there. And basically for many countries in the sample that we looked at, we see that the full needs for DRR and CC expenditure are estimated to be about 3 to 6% of GDP for quite a number of countries. And so that's the gap that we are seeing, both from climate adaptation and disaster risk reduction. So coming about what is budget tagging and tracking, and so again we did this methodology for how a country can design a budget tagging and tracking system for disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation. And that helps basically to identify, classify, and weight the expenditure in the national budget that are related to those priorities. And that allows to kind of monitor and track over time the spending there. And we see that there's a lot of discussion on doing climate budget tagging. So we think that it makes a lot of sense to actually do that in an integrated manner because climate change adaptation and other type of disaster, to look at them together. Although they are not the same, they are very complementary. And so it's important, instead of creating several different systems, to have one system that actually can do both. And the approach that we follow is based quite similarly on the OECD DAC approach, if you're familiar with it, with some what we call the disaster risk reduction marker. But I will show you how that works in practice. So basically, very simply, how we do it is we take the budget of a government and we go line by line and trying together with the government to see from each budget line, is the budget line really has a very main purpose of that budget line is really disaster risk reduction or climate change adaptation, then we'll give it a marker 2. If it's 1, it means the budget line has some significant element of disaster risk reduction, but it's also doing something more than that. So, and then we have marginal, potential, and then known. And so the idea is to see within the budget what are the lines that are the most strongly linked to those expenditure. And to avoid that everyone makes its own kind of analysis, we also publish what we call a taxonomy, which basically helps the one that are putting those numbers, for instance, with the government, with some kind of a reference table that they can follow. So, for instance, if you have, and that's basically what we call a taxonomy, where we look at different type of activities that could be part of the investment of a government and say, okay, well, is that a 2, a 1, or a marginal? And that table is also included into the publication I was referring to. So the idea is to have some kind of harmonization and standardization in the approach of a government to really look at the budget. So when one government official is doing it and another government official is doing, they are assigning the same kind of score because they're following the same methodology and they're following the same reference. I mean, the reference can be changed country by country, but it's important to have a reference that can ensure consistency in the tagging and tracking. And so that's basically what we, just to give you an example of how we did it, but that's not, I mean, just to give, so we're basically looking, okay, is COVID vaccine, that's very much a DRR one, but it's not really so much a climate adaptation, or maybe can be argued. But and then if we talk about integrated DRR and system measure in public works and highway, so this is very much DRR and CCA. So that's what's basically the way we're doing, and line by line, and that give a way to get an understanding of how much the government is actually prioritizing those issues. And the reason why it's so important is for Parliament. If you have that information, you can actually decide, well, is the government actually doing what it's pretending to do? Is it really allocating resources to the priorities that are the national priorities? And so that gives really a good monitoring and system for the government. So that gives you, again, that's another example that you can find in the publication. And of course, some countries have a huge overlap between DRR and CCA. Some countries have a bit of less overlap because when they have very much exposed to other hazards like earthquake, they might have a lot of spending that are not climate change adaptation, but mainly disaster risk reduction. And so that gives you an idea. So here it's only the significant, so it's a little bit smaller dot. If you start looking at the budget line that are principal, significant, and marginal, of course the dot increase and so on. So the more that gives you also an idea of how much of the budget is really specifically assigned, and then how much of the budget is actually has a link, but it's not only focusing on those priorities. And so, as I said, we see a big overlap between climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction, although there are some a little bit that are outside of that are only CCA or they're only disaster risk reduction. And so that's something that is actually already happening in quite a lot of countries. So the countries in green are the ones that are basically doing, trying to institutionalize those budget tagging and system from a climate perspective. The one in yellow are the ones that are doing both, also institutionalizing this both from a climate budget perspective, but also disaster risk reduction angle. And then the one in gray are the ones that are doing some reviews of national budget, but are not doing that from an institutionalized point of view. So not doing that every year. It's just kind of a one-off type of exercise to look at how much in X year has been allocated to those issues. But you see, it's quite a lot of countries that are doing something similar. I think it's about, I don't remember the exact account, but I think in green and yellow, at least 30 countries are actually doing, from an institutional point of view, those kind of tagging and tracking system. So just to summarize a little bit, why is it important to do that? And we have, and again, another publication where we look at the country experience with that. It's really trying to improve the transparency of the budget and understanding of how much the national goals on climate change adaptation are actually receiving funding. It's improved the accountability because you can actually track and monitor over time. You can see from one year to another year if that's really moving forward. It can also be supporting budget allocation. If you think there is a need for additional investment in that area, and you can then now see that there is a gap, you can actually start advocating for allocating more resources to that priority. And then there's also a question of when you want to mobilize green finance, if you can say, well, actually 20% of our budget is actually on green finance, so I need to receive green finance type of instrument to finance those. So that's also something that one of the reasons why it has been used. So I hope that makes sense. I hope it was useful, but I'm happy to exchange and have any of your questions to discuss. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Matthew, because I'm sure those listening to us must have learned a lot. Like I said from the outset, no one is immune, and there's need for more awareness especially amongst parliamentarians and other people in government. I cited 2 instances here, what happened in Borno State in Nigeria, and then indeed the entire Northeast, because a lot of things were destroyed, such that the government is now struggling, looking for money to be able to put them back. In Spain, I don't know how long it's going to take the people of Valencia to be able to overcome what happened there, and so many other places. So this is a very important matter that is supposed to be given a little more attention, more seriousness. I want to thank you again on behalf of the parliamentary unit. I know some people have a number of questions, maybe clarifications and all that. So I'm going to make it open. But I also want to make a point, which is that from my own angle, I think I would like to see generally a situation where people begin to retool how they prepare, how they engage in constructions, because what served some decades back are no longer adequate to face the ferocity of the problems, the challenges that we're having these days. So it's important that generally, like we are now in our law, in our climate change law in Nigeria, we try to have a council that incorporates different ministries, Ministry of Works, housing, power and all that, so that they think together. And if they can think together and know that the world has changed, no one goes around constructing those routes that cannot withstand, any strong flooding or any other disaster. So these things should actually be incorporated. So at this point, we would like to maybe get your insights, your perspectives, and I'm sure Mr. Matthew is more than prepared to do that. Okay, sir. Okay. Yeah, just speak.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much.
I
I am from Namibia, a small country on the southern part of Africa. Very dry country. And then with climate change, what I've observed is the pattern on disasters coming up. It's flooding in the north from the equator. That's not the northern part, including Nigeria, Kenya, etc. That is now under flooding. And then the southern part of Africa now having a dry spell. And both two are disasters because diminishing water resources for the southern part and the poor rainfall. And then lots of rain or water for the northern part that also, which is destructive because it destroys infrastructure. You cannot also produce any food or food under flooding. You can also not produce food under drought.
Yeah.
So, I've been following, and it's a very good model, but where are we going to find the financing? That's the headache. Thank you.
Yes, my brother. Give him. So that
Thank you very much.
I'll put it together.
My name is Geoffrey Feta. I'm a member of parliament from Uganda. I am very grateful to have listened to you discussing the budgeting tools for parliamentarians. But incidentally, I came a little bit late. So I would wish to inquire if that presentation can be shared with us on the platform so that those who missed the presentation can be able to read through. Those are very important budgeting tools. I do appreciate. Thank you.
I can answer to that. It will be shared. I'm from Tonga, a member of parliament,
Okay.
Pacific Islands. Very interesting to hear you describing the tagging of the budget. Is it a process, an entire process where you do begin from budget analysis and then you do the tagging and then you monitor and then you ask for a review of how committed the government is in terms of spending money on certain actions or promised actions? I just want to be clear because it's very new, and I think it's a very useful way of ensuring by Parliament that the government is committed to. Like what I'm hearing from you is that there is underinvestment on the commitment of governments to address the climate impacts or plan of action.
Good.
Yeah. What you can go ahead. Let's hear from you.
Okay. No, thanks so much for the question. I start with the easy one. We can share the presentation. That's a given. And I think your two questions actually have some similarities in the sense that budget tagging is not giving you the new resource. I mean, it's a tool to see where how to maybe use better your budget, your existing resource, how to see where the gaps are. And at the beginning of the presentation, I was showing the 5 steps that we have. And so for us, it's really the beginning when we are discussing with government. It's really the beginning of the journey. It's looking at the cost, looking at how much is being invested, and then the question is how do we fill those gaps, the investment gaps? What are the solution? And that depends very much on the type of investment that you are doing. Some infrastructure investment can have maybe some private investment, some depending of course on the local context, some maybe need some more international funding. So we're trying to also help government to see within their investment pipeline how this investment pipeline can be financed through what kind of mechanism. So that's really where the process is kind of a cycle. So it doesn't stop at the budget tagging. It should actually continue to see how do we fill those investment gaps. I mean, there are no kind of secret recipe, but there are ways to use money more efficiently. And you were mentioning, or was it you, about the way the infrastructure is being built and that we need to change that. And so that's also something, actually, we work very much with Tonga on that. And I was with your Prime Minister this morning on that topic. Because we have done quite a long analysis with the government of Tonga to see how to improve the resilience of infrastructure system, be it transport and other, to a wide range of disasters. And there are very concrete measures that are coming for that need some time to change the way public investment are managed, sometimes to rethink land planning, building codes, and those kind of things, but also sometimes just build new infrastructure to like flood defense and other type of things. But so that's also a part of the work that we're doing at UNDRR, which is kind of complementary to this financing work that I was just presenting. So hope that's that answers partly your question.
Thank you very much indeed. We're always learning. And it's very important, particularly for public officials, because sometimes there's that assumption that, oh, you know it all. Especially those who are being...
Nobody knows.
You know when you work with some civil servants who have been around, who have become institutions, by themselves. Yeah. Sometimes when you are saying that things have changed or have started changing, that we need to adopt a new approach, sometimes they become resistant. So awareness campaign is very, very important, absolutely important, so that everyone is on board. Yeah. And that way, we'll probably be able to reduce disaster and their impacts. Again, I thank you, Matthew. I think he deserves a round of applause.
Thank you so much for taking the time to listen.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.